Hey, it's Renee from the Craft Table. It is the first week of our summer embroidery stitch along. Thank you for stitching along with me this summer. Before we get started, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items. There will be a different video each Saturday that will be uploaded. If you signed up for the stitch along on my website where you entered your email address, then you should receive an email each week that will give you a direct link to the video for that week. In addition to all that, the videos can always be found on my YouTube channel and the community site that I have on Podia. So this is a different type of stitch along and a different type of embroidery project. Many times we're working from a pattern, an embroidery pattern that has been either printed specifically on fabric to embroider a design that maybe you have sketched onto your fabric, an embroidery design sampler made and purchased for learning different embroidery stitches. That's typically what we would do with a stitch along or some type of embroidery workshop. This time around, what I love about this project, and I think it's great for summer, is we already have this gorgeous fabric palette, canvas for stitching. I mean, it's already got these gorgeous designs on there. And I think it just gives you an opportunity to just explore different embroidery stitches without really worrying about what your design is if you're using a typical embroidery pattern, which, don't get me wrong, I love those. I design them, I stitch with them, I teach them, I love them. But for this type of stitch along, we're going to do this. It's just very organic, and there are no rules. There are no lines you need to stay in or make sure you cover up. So that's what I'm really excited about, just an opportunity to explore different embroidery stitches and how you can apply them. And then at the end of the summer, you'll have all those stitches in your toolbox of skills and techniques that you can then apply to any type of project that you want. So I encourage you to explore over the course of this stitch along the different stitches. And again, if you want to stitch it exactly how I'm stitching it, the same colors, the same stitches in the same place, that is definitely fine. But it's also fine if you decide to do your own thing. Cover up some areas that I decide I'm not going to cover up, or don't stitch in areas where I'm stitching. There, I'll say this multiple times, but there are no rules. It's supposed to be a fun, relaxing experience. And that's what I hope you'll get out of this. So this is week one. We're just going to be talking about our fabric, our threads, supplies, and our overall plan. And then next week, we will start with the actual stitching. All right, so this is the fabric that I will be using. It's a Free Spirit panel, and it's called Harmony, and it's by Carolyn Gavin. It is a 22-inch width of fabric. The panel has 2 of these repeats. And what I'll be doing this time is I will just be cutting this in half so that I am just working on one. You can also see that there's not a whole lot of room on 2 of the sides. So I didn't do any of my trimming until after I'd done all the stitching, other than cutting it in half. And I was able to, when I was done stitching, I was still able to trim it in a square big enough to do my pillow using a 20-inch pillow form inside. But it was tight. So what I would recommend doing, and this is what I will be doing this time around, I would either zigzag using your sewing machine, either doing a zigzag stitch all the way around your fabric, or taking some painter's tape, like I don't know if you've ever done any needlepoint or cross stitch, but that's what we do on the edge of the canvas to keep that from fraying. It just kind of keeps the edges from fraying a little bit as you're working. So I'm working with size 8 pearl cotton. It's a little bit thicker than what I typically stitch with. I like to use the 8 weight pearl cotton, but this is such a big, bold area. I felt like my stitches wouldn't really show that well with the 8 weight. So that's why I used the 5. So these are Sue Spargo thread spools, and you notice they've got the purple spool. So Sue color coordinates her thread spools with the needles that she recommends. So the 8 weight thread comes on these purple spools. And the needles that she recommends for that type of thread also come in a purple container. So these are Milner size 1. They are a bit long, so sometimes I will switch to a shorter embroidery needle, and it also depends on what stitches I am using. I have had people ask me if it's okay to mix and match different types of threads and different types of thread weights. And of course, that's perfectly acceptable as well. I will find that sometimes if I don't have the color that I want to use, I will, if it's not the right shade of purple, for instance, and I have it in a different, like this is an R-fill floss spool, I've used that with my 5 weight thread. There was a time where I wanted to use this particular variegated thread, and it doesn't come in a 5 weight. So I just used my 8 weight. And so that's fine as well. You can mix and match different threads. You can, it doesn't even all have to be pearl cotton. You can use pearl cotton with DMC. I've got, I use DMC thread sometimes. If you have some silk threads, that works, anything goes. The hoop that I'm going to be working with is a 6-inch wooden embroidery hoop. Typically, I like to have my design centered in my hoop, so I don't have to move my hoop around in different areas. However, with the piece that I'm going to be working on this large, I do not have a hoop this big. And even if I did, it would be sort of unwieldy. When I stitched the pillow, I used either an 8 or 9-inch hoop, and that worked fine. But I thought, since I'm going to have to be moving my hoop around anyway, I'd rather have something a little bit smaller. It gives me a little bit more control. There's certain stitches that I like to kind of hold the edge of the hoop as I'm stitching. So I think this would give me a little bit more control. So that's the size hoop that I'm going to be working with. And if you're worried about marks being left on your fabric, I didn't have any issue when I was done with mine, ironing out those hoop marks. So when you move your hoop from one area to the other, you just want to be really careful that when you relocate your hoop, that you're not pulling any threads. So if you're gentle when you put your hoop on an area that's already been stitched, you shouldn't have to worry about any of the stitches getting messed up. You will also want to have a pair of scissors, just something to cut your threads with. So I always have a bunch of these laying around. These little scissors, these scissors, big scissors work as well. You just don't necessarily need to have them that big. As far as the overall stitching plan goes, the first time around, I just sort of made it up as I went along. I would start stitching something and would decide this particular flower would look really good with the chain stitch, or I think I'll use a raised chain stitch on the stem. This time around, I will be following pretty much what I did the first time around, with some changes here and there. And whatever I do, I will communicate with you as I do it. The next week we'll be doing the back stitch. So I will start off the video demonstrating how to stitch the back stitch. And then I will talk about the different places that I'm planning on using the back stitch. And the same goes for the chain stitch when we work on that, the French knots when we do that stitch, and so on and so forth. So remember, I said this was low-key, relaxing, and no stress stitch along. So because there aren't a whole lot of rules in this stitch along, that also means I'm not going to plan too far ahead as far as what my overall stitching plan will be, because I will be stitching along with you. Between this week and next week, gather all your supplies, have your fabric prep, and if you think of any questions in the meantime, email me or leave them in the comments, and I can make sure that I have them all answered before we get started on the next week. So I will see you next week when we talk about how to stitch the back stitch. Happy stitching.